Living Off-Grid, the Permaculture Way, presented by Rakesh Rootsman Rak. Roots in permaculture.com, interviewed by Ada Mertz. ConsciousEarthAlliance.com.
Yeah, so the idea of this talk is really to introduce permaculture and the practicalities of permaculture and what it has to offer. And I guess first, the most obvious place to start is, well, what is permaculture? Because everyone has, maybe now, many people will have heard of permaculture, but everyone's got a slightly different understanding of what it is and what it isn't. And I guess that's fair, given that everyone who engages with permaculture engages with it in a different way. So as many people as there are doing permaculture, different people will interpret it in different ways, hence many people seeing it from different perspectives. I guess what is what is unmovable in the permaculture world is that it's based on ethics, and hopefully we'll get a chance to cover those. I think most people, first of all, hear it or see it from a food growing perspective. So many people think it's some kind of hippie weird way of growing food or something like that, you know, and that's understandable because its history is in food growing. So it started as a reaction. So back in the late 60s, the limits to growth was there was a group called the Club of Rome who started to look at many of the world's issues, looking at population growth in relationship to economic growth, in relationship to world resources, and etc., to start to see, well, how do they all interrelate? How do they all affect each other? And in 1972, they released a paper called Limits to Growth, which very clearly showed how certain resources were really crucial in how the world went from, a very, very steady growth in terms of population growth to all of a sudden just exponentially going crazy. And that was due to one resource, which is a finite resource. And that finite resource was used very, very creatively, very, very, well, in some cases not so creatively, but in many cases very creatively, to help us to achieve things much faster, much more vigorously than we were able to do before. But as a finite resource, that resource at some point will come to an end. And this is what the report was highlighting. And that resource, of course, is petroleum, oil. And as we know, if we start looking at all of the different areas in which oil, or we utilize oil, and all of the different systems, whether it's food systems, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation, whether it's, in all of our gadgets and things, how much petroleum oil is involved in all of those elements, we can see that once the price of oil starts to go up, once it gets more and more scarce, and therefore the price of oil starts to go up, many of these things are going to either become very, very expensive or scarce, or, and so there's going to be some serious problems. So in 1972, when this paper was released, many people, and obviously there was a lot of people already looking at green issues before then, but this really stimulated a lot of movements to say, hey, we really need to do something about it. And in particular, where permaculture comes in, a couple of people were, one of whom was a lecturer in agriculture in Australia, looked at this and said, wow, I'm teaching the world how to destroy itself. By teaching agriculture the way that I'm teaching it, I can't do this. I need to rethink this. This is not what I want to be doing in the world. So he went away, and one of the people who he used to live with, they started really deeply thinking and doing some research to start up to see how they could grow food in a way that is much more environmentally friendly, that doesn't require fossil fuels. And it took a good 10 years before they come up with the most with a really strong set of solutions, which they then started spreading across the world. And this solution was permaculture. So what they looked at is they looked at how nature on her own finds balance. If we think about it, for millions of years, all of the animals, all the plants, everything on this planet has somehow managed to live in sync with each other, has managed to find some way that it can survive, that there's enough food on this planet to serve all of the different animals and insects, etc., etc. And so there was never a scarcity of food. And so there was always this balance. So where did this food come from? How did it find this balance? And so this is what they started to study. And by studying in particular how forests and jungles worked and where the abundance is in each of these spaces, they started to break it down into principles. Utilizing these principles, they then started to build up a pattern for how we can actually, in modern days, grow food utilizing these principles, i.e., so that nothing becomes greedy. Nothing, no system, no element in the system takes more nutrients, takes more resources than the system can actually offer them, and so on and so forth. So how do you find balance? So this was one of the, very simple principles. But they realized this isn't enough. There's another really important element that's missing from this. It's all good and well trying to work out how to keep systems working well. But what they realized is that without human beings' ethical approach, it's all good and well understanding these systems, but if human beings have a very negative, very destructive, very greedy kind of approach, all this knowledge will lead to nothing. So they also studied peoples. They studied peoples who they deemed to be somehow living in harmony with each other, with their surroundings, etc., and those who were somehow fighting against each other and really living in a very destructo culture kind of way. And by studying those who lived in sync with each other, they started to come up with some ethics. And so as permaculture evolved, the most important part of permaculture is that everything that is done is balanced against these ethics. So it's a very ethical approach to initially food growing. And those ethics were, or nowadays, it's gone through one or two little iterations, but nowadays, in simple terms, it's now down to 3 ethics. The first one being earth care. So earth care is all about whatever it is we do, are we truly taking care of the earth? Are we truly enriching our surroundings? Are we cleaning the air? Are we cleaning our waters? Are we making our soils richer, more abundant with life? Or are we depleting it? Are we destroying it? Are we polluting it? So in every decision we make, we ask ourselves this basic question: is it earth care? At the very least, we should not be destroying, depleting, etc. But at the best scenario, so even if we're in a situation where we realize we're not depleting, we're not destroying, our next question is, could we be doing something that goes beyond that? Could we tweak our system just a little bit so that we're actually enriching the system? The next ethic is people care. So in the same way, because we are human beings and we are designing from a human perspective, We look at people care in terms of whatever it is we do. So however, if when I'm designing something to meet my needs, am I doing it in such a way that I enrich other people's lives? Am I enriching people's lives that I know? Enriching people's lives that I don't know? Enriching people's lives in completely the other side of the world? Or am I destroying, depleting, abusing, etc.? So again, in very much the same way, we look at, are we, at the very least, we don't want to be depleting, destroying, we don't want to be depriving anyone of their ability to live and thrive. But again, if that's what we're doing, we look just a little bit more. We try to redesign it. Is there something I can do to make my system even richer than that? Could I tweak it just a little bit to make sure that I'm actually enriching other people's lives? And when we're talking about, as say, it's maybe it's quite easy to understand that from the perspective of people that we do know, people in our immediate surroundings, people in our town, in our country, in our whatever geographic location, or our whatever other sentimental groups that we might feel we're attached to. But what about other groups? How can we enrich their lives? And it goes even beyond that for me personally, because I also think about future generations. What is it that I'm doing that could affect future generations of their ability to live and thrive? So that's earth care, people care. And the third ethic is fair share. And this has two components to it. One part of it is only to take out of the system whatever the system can genuinely offer. Meaning, you only take what you really need. You don't take more than you actually need to thrive. And you leave whatever you can back in the system to allow the system to continuously enrich itself. And so the second part is this reinvestment of surplus. And by reinvestment, we mean it could be, that you literally put the energy, the nutrients, the whatever it is, back into the system so it becomes richer and richer and stronger. Or from a people care perspective, fair share would be to reinvest in other people, to enrich other people's lives, to, whatever surplus you have, you give it to people who need it, etc. So permaculture is based on these three basic principles, these three basic ethics. And while, as in any system, you'll find there are people who totally understand that, there's other people who just don't understand that, and they just think it's a food-growing system. So you'll find many different flavors of permaculture out there, and that's fine, that's understandable. But this is the basics of permaculture: earth care, people care, fair share. So, as I say, initially, it was all about food growing. But as people started to evolve their understanding of how permaculture works, what they realized is these ethics and the principles and the design process of how to design to make sure all of these systems really support each other and really enrich each other. They realized you could use permaculture to design almost anything. You could use it to design all of our human needs. So why not use it to design, where we live, how we live, the housing that we live in? Why not use it to design our economic structures? Why not use it to design our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being? So permaculture can be pretty much used to design almost any aspect of our life. So, excuse me. So the premise for this particular talk was to look at some practical things. And I guess now might be a useful time to hear from others to find out, well, what human needs would you like me to talk about in terms of how permaculture can solve yeah, which human needs would you like me to talk about in terms of how permaculture can find solutions to? So I don't know what's the best way to do this, if people want to put it into the chat or if people want to unmute themselves and just talk, or...
They can actually put it in the chat and then I will translate it for them. I think that's the best way. Put it in bold letters so I can see it. Thank you very much. Rakesh, my question is actually, for me at least, and for a lot of people here living in cold countries, how do you cope with the heating, how to heat your house, or what is the best way and the most practical and not so expensive? What would you advise people living in cold countries?
So there's two sides to that. So first of all, there's whether, are you in the very, very luxurious position of being able to build your own home, or are you taking on existing building stock and therefore having to retrofit? If you're building your own home, it's very easy indeed. You design it in such a way that you take us, in the winter months when the sun is quite low, you make sure that you have things like you on your south facing, your sun facing aspect, you make sure you have what we call like a sun trap, where sun comes in through big window. Then you have another big window behind it. You have a solid cob, some kind of big thermal mass, like a cob wall. You also have a cob floor. So whatever sun comes in, it basically heats that space. It heats the thermal mass, and then your house, your living space, is behind it. And so this is actually known as a volatile space as well. So as the sun comes and goes, this space heats and cools, but having this thermal mass, that absorbs the heat while it's there, and it absorbs it very, very, very slowly. It also releases it very, very slowly. And that heat can then be also moved to the inside of the house. So the inside of the house is not as volatile. And if it's insulated well, you can, with just passive, without any heating whatsoever, even in very, very, very cold climates, you can get to about 14 degrees centigrade without any heating. So as people know, 18 degrees is the kind of minimum kind of comfortable temperature for most people to be living in. So in order to top that up, basically all you need to do is find some kind of a system. So one important aspect of permaculture is it's all about each system is interconnected with other systems. So excuse me. So you're continuously looking at how one element affects and supports another element. So nothing is there in isolation. So one of the elements that you have or one of the functions you need in a house is you're invariably going to cook. And one of the outputs of cooking is typically heat. So how can you design your heating systems in such a way that the excess heat that isn't being used in the actual cooking process, whatever waste heat you've got, how can you trap that and store that in your building? And again, there's many ways to do that. Rocket stoves and things like that, rocket mass heaters, I'm sure people are familiar with, is a really easy way to do that. If you're not in that kind of luxurious position of being able to build your own house, then it becomes more difficult, because it's really, and there's 1,000 answers to that, because every single house is in every part of the world is different. So if your house itself isn't designed well, it becomes very difficult to heat. The important part is it's not the heating aspect of it, it's actually the insulation, i.e., are you retaining whatever heat? Because you can create as much heat as you like, but if you're letting most of that heat go out into the air, you know, your space isn't really going to heat up. So yeah, I can't give you one clear answer because every single physical space is going to be different. So you'd need to find different solutions to that. And yeah, and if your house isn't designed well, there's not much you can do. But as we know nowadays, many people are exploring different, you know, from external wall insulation. Obviously, if you're lucky enough to have cavity walls, you know, different insulations for your cavity walls. You can have internal wall insulation. You can have underfloor insulation with XPF, and yeah, there's so many different tools out there. So the first thing is really insulation rather than a source of heating, because then, as I say, with clever, yeah, with clever, a few clever tricks, you can work out how to actually heat your space.
And Rakesh, what are you using for your house? Is your house fully according to the permaculture standards?
So as people know, I'm up until COVID, I was continuously traveling. I would be in England barely 2 months a year. So I've never really had a space. I've never really had a home. So I've just kind of moved in, you know, during COVID, I just moved into my parents' house, which is just an ordinary, straightforward home, which, to be honest, I haven't really done much to. And yeah, so I really haven't done much to this place because I've never really considered this to be my home. But I hope one day to actually find a home.
The world is your home, I think.
Absolutely.
And I've only known you as a traveling permaculturist, you know, sharing your knowledge with everyone, where you're invited and never stopping with your work. But anyway, another question that I have from someone here is, first of all, how to grow a lot of food? That's, of course, a very big question. I don't know what a lot of food is. I mean, it depends on the person and their family members. I don't know if you can answer that in a way.
Sure.
Already asked this question before.
Okay, so there's various ways I can answer this. I guess the important thing is, all right, if we look at a typical diet that most people eat nowadays, you first question is, why do we eat the kind of foods that we currently eat? And it's mostly because we are being sold, we're being told that this is what we should be eating by whatever media, etc., etc. And if we actually look at it, it's we're being told that because of commodification, because that's where the big corporations can make huge amounts of money. If you actually look at how healthy that is for us, you can see how many diseases are caused by the different types of foods that we eat. And so if we are looking to grow the same food that we are used to eating, then yeah, this is not interesting to me, because we're still going to end up in the same kind of situation of poor quality food with poor nutrients and yeah, lots of diseases. So instead, what I'm more interested in is growing foods that are what I call nutritionally dense foods. So imagine you eat, you know, a bowl full of whatever, rice and various grains and or various vegetables and whatever, and a lot of that is very nutritionally poor. Your body, in order to break that food down and you then get access to those nutrients, it spends a certain amount of energy. You know, it has to produce a certain amount of acid to start breaking it down, and so on and so forth. So it takes some energy, and then slowly, 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 it starts releasing the nutrients, and the body says, "Ooh, I don't really have enough nutrients. I need more. I better eat more." So it sends a signal to the body, no, I haven't eaten enough. I need to eat more. I need to eat more. I need to eat more. And the more you eat, the more energy it takes, which is why so many people after they've eaten are like really sleepy, because they've basically eaten more food than is necessary, and they've got very little nutrients from their foods. And obviously, continuously doing this, you basically, your immune system is really weakened, and therefore it leads to certain diseases. So instead, if we eat nutritionally dense foods, first of all, we only need to eat a fraction of the food we're eating to actually get the nutrients we need. And at the same time, we return those nutrients very, very quickly. It takes very little energy from us to break it down, and therefore we have a huge surplus of food, a surplus of nutrients. So many people can't understand how I manage to do all the things that I do. And it's quite simple. It's because I typically take care of my diet. Okay, in this particular case, as I say, I've been literally working 14-hour days for almost 2 weeks non-stop, and with very little rest. And eventually my body says, hey, especially with the plummeting weather and, cycling around in almost zero temperatures was, finally kind of got me. But generally, because of my reasonably healthy diet, it's very rare that I actually get this ill. So what I'm trying to say is, to grow, if we want to just grow the same foods that everyone else is eating, then we're not really solving anything. Whereas if we start growing more nutritionally dense foods, then all of a sudden we can, first of all, we need a lot less land. We need a lot less, we need to destroy a lot less of our environment to actually be doing this. In fact, it's quite the reverse, because a really easy way to grow nutritionally dense foods is in what we call food forests. And typically food forests, and they look slightly different in temperate versus tropical climates. And in temperate climates, typically they, what we're talking about is lots of trees and shrubs and plants that are basically all perennial, which means that they come back year after year after year after year, meaning that we don't need to sow, we don't need to be digging the earth and destroying all the incredible, intricate, incredible soil food web that happens underneath the soil, inside the soil, that basically enriches our soil. If we think of all the different bacterias and insects and how they all interact with each other to create life in the soil, every time we dig, we destroy this, which is why many of the agricultural soils are technically, they're dead, they're lifeless, and they're just replaced with artificial chemicals just to make things grow. And somehow we call that food, food that is just grown in dead soil, in a dead structure. Let alone all the chemicals and the poisons and this side, the herbicide and the pesticides and all the deadly kind of chemicals that they put on it. Whereas in this kind of food forest, we allow the soils to remain really rich and abundant, because we're very rarely digging anything up. We dig a few things up, but not as much as, and we're certainly not turning the whole area over. And these foods just keep coming back year after year after year after year. By planting lots of trees, eventually, after 4 or 5 years, most of the trees will have found their water courses, which means that we never ever need to water our food forests again. because they'll have found the water courses and they'll pump them up and they'll transpire the water back out into the system, which other plants can then make use of. The trees themselves attract lots of animals and insects which come and eat and poop and eat and poop. They also will obviously drop their leaves, they'll drop fruits, they'll drop twigs, which then break down, and mixed with all these poop and stuff just decomposes and breaks down and feeds the lower layers. And this continuous cycle of enrichment means that we never need to add compost. We never need to add nutrients. We never need to, let's say, water. We don't need to plant things. The system just keeps working. In fact, yeah.
So it's actually an imitation of nature. You're actually
Totally
imitating nature and creating an eco area, maybe in your backyard or wherever you are. Is that correct, Rakesh?
100%, exactly. And so what we are doing is we're just mimicking like how nature works. All we're doing when we're to intentionally design it, because what you'll find in nature when where this happens of its own accord is many of the fruits that we find in these spaces are small wild fruits. They're nutritionally dense, sure, but they are, they're the small wild plums, they're the small wild apples, they're, whereas what we want is we want bigger plums, bigger apples, and we want, certain other qualities. So the reason why we don't have those bigger fruits wild in nature in this temperate climate, the limiting factor is the amount of nutrients that are cycled through the system. So if we understand that, and if we understand where nutrients can come from, and if we can then create a system that generates more nutrients by planting certain things in the right places, then all of a sudden we've got enough nutrients cycling around our system so that we can then plant those bigger fruits and vegetables and what have you. But most important thing from my perspective is that it's also totally enriching nature. So now all of a sudden we've got a space where all animals and insects are actually really welcome. They're part of the ecosystem, meaning that they are absolutely integral to the system. That it's absolutely integral to the system continuing. And so, as we know, one of the, forget climate change, probably for me, what's more worrying is, and climate change is worrying in itself, but is the biodiversity loss. Because of our human activities, they say that 1 million species of animals and insects and things are going to go extinct in our lifetime because of our behavior. These things will never be replaced. This is yes. Shocking. And whereas growing food in this way, if we replace many of these barren landscapes that they call agriculture, which are absolutely dead from the perspective of nature, if we replace these with these biodiverse, rich spaces, which is full of life, can you see how we can massively transform this planet?
So if everybody were to create food forests, create ecological, rich, diverse areas, whether it's in the backyard or in the local, in another place, we would actually be contributing to this whole climate change problem. I mean, not the problem, but elevating it, improving it. Being a permaculturist, or I think what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing from you, Rakesh, is that you're not only growing food for yourself, you're growing food for everybody, for the animals in the forest. And you, what I'm also hearing is, what I've learned from you is that it takes less input, human input, because it's a very natural way of gardening, of creating your own food. So it would require less input, but the yield would be quite big for the input that you put in. Is that a little bit one of the principles of one of the of
Absolutely.
permaculture?
So about 12 years ago, I designed a garden for my parents who were getting old, and pretty much I designed something close to a forest garden, and then having had it abandoned, you know, after my parents both passed away, the place was more or less abandoned for 6-7 years, and I only came back because of COVID, and so almost no one had touched the garden for so long, and I came back as the pandemic hit, and you know, all the borders and everything started to close. So I was kind of stuck in Paris for a week trying to get back home. And you know, I was in a high risk area, so I was told I must quarantine for 2 weeks. Yeah, no problem. Came back, just ate from my garden. No need to go anywhere. Then after my quarantine, I started cycling around, looking at all the queues in the shops. So it took 2 months before I even bothered to go into a shop, because everything I needed was straight from my garden. I could just eat straight from my garden, because even though no one had touched it for 7 years, it was still full of food. So yeah, it's really, when I say low maintenance, I really mean low maintenance.
Maintenance, yeah. Rakesh, another thing that I discovered is, you know, when you do have your own garden, you always have a surplus. You know, you don't know what to do with the rest. And of course, one of the ways is to give it away. But still, you know, it's nice to be able to keep some for the winter months that you don't, you don't rely on going to the supermarket again. So, what tips do you have for food storage or keeping enough food for the winter?
So there's a lot of ways of preserving foods. So, you know, but me personally, my favorite way is lacto-fermentation, for the simple reason that when you ferment foods in this way, and this is an ancient art, this isn't something new, it's not a new fashion. This is, you know, most of us wouldn't be here alive today if it wasn't for people working out how to ferment foods. So lacto-fermenting foods chemically changes your actual food. It kind of pre-ferments, it pre-digests, if you like, your foods, which means that it makes more of the nutrients in your food available. So you actually get a lot more nutrients out of it. But even more impressively is it then encourages a really good set of bacteria, which means, as we know, most of the illnesses in this world come from either an imbalance in the gut or an imbalance in the blood. And so our gut, as we know, is full of billions of different bacteria, and but these bacteria can continuously change. So depending on our diet, will dictate which bacteria is predominant. And so this could either lead to all kinds of things like candida because we're eating too much sugars and blah, 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 or it could be, you know, so many of the illnesses come from bad gut bacteria or an inappropriate or an imbalanced gut bacteria. So if we can change that and actually have a really good healthy gut bacteria, we can solve a lot of the issues that many people have. So lacto-fermentation actually creates that really magical gut bacteria. So that's my favorite way of doing it. And I mean, many of my students, so anyone who studies with me joins this network, the Roots and Permaculture Network. And as such, we have our own internal skill shares, which are quite in-depth. But as soon as the pandemic hit, we decided we would like to offer something to the public as well. So once a month, on the 22nd of every month, we do another project which is for the public called Roots and Resilience. And that's just a free public skill share, which we do online every month. And in there, invariably, we quite often talk about fermentation and food preservation. So if you want to find out more about food preservation, you can look at my YouTube channel, and you'll probably find there's a few videos out there on how to ferment foods. But there's so many different techniques for preserving foods. it's also really, so for example, with a lot of the things that we typically throw away and put into compost, we can quite often do something with those. We can, for example, I make vinegars from various things that people throw away. So fruit scraps, things. And, and they could either be simply for a cleaning vinegar, or they could be for eating vinegar. But it's pretty much, really making use of every single part of every food that you get. And by living this way, pretty much, as say, you need very little food to feed yourself. And you take very little energy out of your system to actually digest the food and get the nutrients you need, which means you have a massive surplus of energy and nutrients, etc. But you also, as say, using a very little amount of space in your garden. You really don't need as much space as people, because if you go down the line of, no, I want to grow carrots, I want to grow beetroots, and I want to have potatoes, and I want to have cabbages, I want to have wheat and all these kind of things, and tomatoes, you're going to spend so much time and energy growing those things. Invariably, some of those crops will fail because of the climate, because of different pests that may come, because of so many different factors, and very often people get disheartened. Whereas with perennial foods, if one year you don't get so many cherries, hey, you can have tons of strawberries. So what? If one year maybe you don't have so many strawberries, all right, you're going to have loads of mulberries. You always have, there's lots and lots of perennial greens. There's no reason why anyone should ever have to buy greens, because there are so many plants that will give you continuous green leaves, even in the winter.
It's true.
So,
absolutely true. Yeah. Rakesh, I once went on a wild food walk with you, and it was very, very fascinating, because I realized there's so much food growing out there in nature, and each type of plant has certain qualities, certain taste. And it was like during the walk, I think, I don't know how many types of greenery we managed to eat, or just to have a nibble. And I felt so satisfied, because it felt like a whole new world had opened up for me. And it's there growing, and most people consider it as as rubbish or as weeds. And I have a friend who half his garden is just what others would consider weeds, and as he's working in the garden, he's nibbling away, but he's got a strong body because he's working in the garden, and half his vegetables is that. Is that the same with you? Would you recommend people also to do that? What
I would say probably a good 50% of my micronutrients come from foraging, from just picking foods as I'm walking around, and just so yeah, I would say it's absolutely one of the reasons. It's where I get many of my micronutrients from. So learning how to safely identify plants and how to safely, an edible plant. So for example, a potato, everyone knows is edible, but actually in many forms, it's actually very, 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 very poisonous. So you need to know how to prepare, when to cook and when to, how to prepare food. So it's not just learning what is and what isn't edible. It's also about, method of preparation as well. But once you learn that safely, there's so many edible things out there, and really delicious and really, nutritionally dense. So I'd highly recommend it. If you get a chance to do a good wild food walk with someone who knows what they're doing, then it's really worthwhile. It's free food, and it's nutrients that are just. I did a wild food walk just 2 weeks ago, And you know, even in this cold weather, we still found about, I don't know, 15, 18 things that we could eat, you know, in this cold weather where everything's dying back. So imagine when it's summer and it's, you know, full on and everything's coming to life. So yeah, it's a wonderful activity.
There's a question here. So how to eat potatoes safely?
Actually, I don't normally eat potatoes, but my while I was here, some of my colleagues from my local transition town gave us some seed potatoes to help encourage neighbours all to grow food together. So quite literally this morning, I was just harvesting some of my last potatoes. Well, as you know, a lot of potatoes contain solanine, which, you know, for arthritis and eczemas and things like that is not particularly good. So I don't know about how to eat it safely. All I would say is eat it in moderation, and certainly, you know, yeah, to really think about how, you know, it's more than just what you're eating. It's how your overall, you know, how active are you? So if you're very, very active and you're keeping your lymph nodes pumping away, but because you're physically doing a lot of work, you know, you can push a lot of these things out. But if you're very sedentary and eating things like the you know, tomatoes and potatoes and peppers, all of which contain solanine, it builds up. And this is why so many people have different diseases. So I'd say in moderation, unless you're very, very active in keeping your lymph nodes pumping away and therefore eliminating these toxins.
There's some questions from, let me see, it's gone now. Oh yes, if the population is from Matty, if the population grows, how can we still provide organic food to everyone? And then second question, can we provide nutritional dense food for 10 million people? So let's tackle the first question. If the population grow, how can we still provide organic food to everyone?
If we do it locally, if we do, if everyone gets involved in growing food in a local environment, you know, and working as communities, I don't see any reason as to why we can't feed each other. You know, I'm not I'm a practical person. I'm not a theoretical person. You know, once people start getting academic on me, I switch off. All right, just give me something and let me just go. I'm just going to go. I'll go and harvest something. You talk about your theoretical stuff and let me just get on. And you know, if you want me to build a house, all right, I'll come and build a house. If you want me to, so whereas if you want to just talk theoretically, I'm sorry, I'm out of here.
You're gone.
So I'm gone. I'm long gone. Because that theoretical talk, it really drives me crazy, because you know, people build up this perfect world in their heads of how the world should be, and they've never taken one step to actually achieve anything and change the world, and that infuriates me. So I'm not going to pretend that I know the answers to those kind of big questions. All I know is that if you give me a little community of people, I will work out how they can grow enough food to take care of themselves. And it's done by collaboration, and it's done by doing it locally. And if we rely on and it's especially if you remember that by growing food in this agricultural way, and especially if we're feeding so much of the things we're growing to animals to then feed back as food, you know, that whole system of, you know, the meat and milk industry is so destructive to this planet. It's so destructive. I think most news agencies are now finally catching up with this. We're seeing this in the newspapers finally. Something we've been talking about for 20, 30 years, but it's finally catching up.
Rakesh, just one last question, if you could answer it, because time is almost up. Sorry. How to make sure animals don't eat all the garden forest yield? What kind of animals? I don't know. Little
As far
animals,
as
big
I'm,
animals.
as far as I'm concerned, animals are totally 100% part of the system. And if you think that you are so superior on this planet that that animals do not deserve to live on this planet and only you do, then I'd suggest you really seriously need to rethink your place on this earth. So for me, animals are absolutely welcome to come and eat stuff from my garden. And you know what? There is more than enough to feed them and to feed me. And I find it quite horrific that so many people think that they need to deter and stop other beautiful creatures from being able to thrive and survive on this planet and deprive them of their ability to thrive. And yeah, no. So I'd say that's not even a question for me.
Actually, it's about the fair share part, sharing, isn't it? That's it. Yeah, it's one of the wonderful. Thank you for being here again, Rakesh.